Church, this week we are going to go through the book of First Thessalonians, and we're starting in the first chapter. Hopefully, you guys are at a point where you've been reading through it and checking it out. But I want to go through just a little bit of background and talk some about this book. There is first a little bit of debate about whether or not this was actually the first epistle that Paul wrote. A lot of evidence points to it being Galatians, which obviously we just studied, but a lot points to this. And in reality, it's not a heaven or hell issue, so it doesn't really matter. But let's talk a little bit about the background of this book and the story behind it, because that is really going to be key in how we come to understand the content of what Paul's telling us here. So this story actually starts in the 17th chapter of Acts, and for those that have been around for a while, have heard me preach on this probably more than one time, and certainly make reference to it. I believe it's on Paul's second missionary journey. He is with Silas and Timothy, and they go to several different cities, but when they land in Thessalonica, Paul is there, and he's preaching. He's there for I think a year and a half, but he is really, really, really embraced by the Thessalonian church and the people that were there that were converting, and it was such a movement of that early church happening. I mean, we're not talking about big gatherings in church buildings with lights and production, all that stuff. We're talking about believers like you and I, meeting in homes and people's lives being changed, both Jew and predominantly Greek people. But to get the backstory on this, you got to look in, like I say, that 17th chapter of Acts. And the cool thing about this is that what happened is that the gospel has taken such a hold, and the Holy Spirit was moving so radically during that time in Thessalonica, in the Thessalonian church, that they're actually the government saw this as a threat to the authority of Caesar. And in one instance, Paul preached and created a ruckus. There's a guy named Jason involved with this too, but basically created a ruckus in town, and they ran him out of town, and he went to Berea next, and he did the same thing, but it was such an angry mob and outcry there in Thessalonica that a lot of the Jews and angry Greeks came from Thessalonica to Berea and chased him there. So he had to leave there, and then he ended up in Athens, and then after Athens ended up in Corinth because he just kept getting run out of town based off of what he was preaching about the gospel. And so the first letter to the Thessalonian church was actually written and sent from Corinth, but Paul had such an affinity for these people. It reminds me a lot of how much our bishop Aner loves us, and when he comes to visit us and preach, he's always so embraced, and he leaves so impacted and different by the way we love him. And man, we don't even, most of us don't even speak the same language of him. So that's kind of an example of what this is like. And so after things cooled off a bit, what he did was he sent Timothy back to Thessalonica, and Timothy wrote to Paul saying, dude, you don't understand the move of the Spirit that these people, that what they're doing. They are being the church. They're embracing the gospel fully. And it's incredible. There's not, so much drama and all this mess, but it's amazing. And Paul was so encouraged, and he really, really wanted to come back to see them. And so this first letter to the Thessalonian church is his response to what Timothy reports about what was happening at the church. And it was very encouraging. But there's a few themes here that I want us to look at. Number one, I want us to understand the backstory of where this came from and why this is like this. Now, I've preached on this a lot, but I've never dug into the Thessalonian letter to see exactly what all it's about. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to open this up and do some expository exploration of this and see, what it was that they were doing and what was happening with them that was so radical that Paul, that he was literally, willing to get chased out of town for them. So There's probably four main themes in the book. As much as I've read, one of them is that the first thing he kind of starts off with is a lot of praise and encouragement for the Thessalonian church and for what they're going through there and what they're doing. And the thing is that he's recognizing how different and how set apart they are. How set apart they are from being under just the rule of Caesar, but also from the rule of their culture. And we're gonna unpack that more: sexual immorality and idol worship and all kinds of stuff. Like, he's recognizing the freedom that they have, what they've been set free from. And so he recognizes that, number one. Around chapter 2, he gives some specific attention to the cost, and recognizes and really makes them understand, like, the cost of what it is that they're living out and what they're doing, like how they're persecuted and how they are being treated as a result, and the stuff that's happening to them. And it's funny because Paul even talks about, like, sharing in the pain of the cross, of feeling this real true brotherhood with them. And so we're going to unpack that too, and talk a little bit about what is happening even in our own church culture and how that relates to us, and what we're experiencing. So and then kind of lastly, I'm looking at my notes here, my notepad. One of the things he does is he really challenges the church, and he challenges them to keep pressing on, and he prays for endurance and for them, and leaves them really with a message of hope, is what it is. So, because they're going through some kind of bad stuff, but some really good stuff also. But it's really ultimately the hope and the gospel of Christ. So far from what I've been reading and studying and understanding, man, this has been really, really encouraging, and it's been really good. But like I say, understanding the backstory will really help you out. Probably the first 30 verses of chapter 17 in Acts will put this into perspective for you, and you get an idea of the affinity that he has for the Thessalonian church. So make sure I don't have anything else on here. But some of the reoccurring, more biblical themes that you'll see is that you'll see that Paul is quoting, or he's not necessarily quoting, but he's referring to a lot of stuff in the Proverbs and some of the Psalms. And then even the challenge that he issues them, like, in continuing to press on, living that gospel-centered life. You're going to see a lot of themes from the Sermon on the Mount of what Jesus taught us it means to be and to live and exist in the kingdom. And so they're playing that out. They're living that out. I mean, real life, legit stuff. So I'm looking forward to going through this book and talking about this with all of you, so that I come to a better understanding of how it is for me and walking out my faith. And man, I love you guys. We'll see you and talk to you all on Sunday.